What are the pathways for doctor registration in Australia? In this video, I'm going to cover what for many international medical graduates is one of the most confusing aspects of the medical system in Australia. And stay tuned to the end for a chance to get some free help in terms of your job application in Australia. Hi, I'm Anthony, I'm the Career Doctor. I make videos on YouTube for other doctors to help them with career challenges, things like the job application process. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing, and if you like what you hear and it's useful, leave a comment or a like in the description below. So we're covering some issues, particularly for international medical graduates in this series, looking at some of the complexities of coming to work in Australia. And I have a bit of a confession. I've been thinking about doing this particular video for a little while because in my opinion the registration pathways and the registration process is, as I say, one of the more confusing aspects if you're coming from another jurisdiction. It's quite complex. So I wanted to find a way of explaining it in ways that might make sense to someone coming from an external perspective. But I need to do a bit of an upfront disclaimer here. Like most issues related to the process of getting a job, getting registered, getting a visa in Australia, it's important to understand that you need to get individual advice on your circumstance. Circumstances do vary for individuals, and also things change over time. The process via the medical board, the process via immigration department, etc. can change over the time period. Hopefully the advice I'm giving you is good in terms of general advice. But if you do have specific questions, I'm happy to try and provide some answers in the comments section. But as I said, it's really important that you try and get your own independent, individual advice. So without any further ado, let's dive into registration. Or not, because what I'm going to explain to you today in this video is your pathway to registration. And then in a later video, I will talk about what this then means in relation to your actual options for becoming registered, because there are a number of pathways to registration, but there's even more categories of registration as a doctor in Australia. But having said this, because the pathways to registration are inextricably linked to a registration status, I will mention some of the registration categories, but mainly in passing, and as I said, don't fret, I will come back to them in more detail in a later video for you. So the first thing to know about getting registered in Australia is that it's the same process wherever you work in the country. No matter what state or territory you're in, it's all conducted through what's called the Medical Board of Australia, under the overarching umbrella of AHPRA, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. And that's actually a reasonably new thing, only for about a decade. Prior to that, there was various state and territory medical boards, which actually made it even more complex. So that's actually a good thing. So under the Medical Board of Australia, there are essentially 4 pathways to becoming registered as a doctor in the country. And if you're an IMG, you can find some very helpful information about these pathways, the process for applying for registration via the AHPRA website and the Medical Board of Australia pages that are based on that website. There's even a handy flowchart that sort of helps you make some decisions about which option might be best for you. So with a lot of the things I'll be talking about in this video, I will provide links to the key pages and sites in the description below. So the first option, which actually doesn't appear on the Medical Board website, is what I'm going to call the Australian pathway. You see, the pathways to registration in this country for international medical graduates are basically comparisons against the process by which Australian and also New Zealand medical graduates first become registered in the system and progress through what's called provisional registration to general registration, and then hopefully ultimately adding what's called specialist registration at some point. So in terms of actual registration, what most doctors ultimately want to get is what's called the generalist registration first, and then your specialist registration. And this actually includes most international medical graduates as well who are looking to move here permanently. It's just that you are initially going through other forms of registration on your pathway to general registration and specialist registration. So if you look at the Medical Board of Australia website, you will see that you have 3 options in terms of a pathway to registration as an IMG. First, we have what's called the Competent Authority pathway. So this pathway is essentially the medical board saying, we recognise that if you come from another healthcare system which has very similar systems and processes and standards to the Australian context, that we will recognise you as being fairly equivalent. So the Competent Authority pathway is for both non-specialist or trainee IMGs as well as specialist IMGs, and we include in Australia general practice in that specialty category. And it's a fairly streamlined process to being granted general registration in Australia. The board has approved a number of international authorities as competent in their assessment of doctors for medical registrations. So those authorities are the General Medical Council in the UK for both local UK graduates as well as international graduates who go through the pathway there called the PLAB, the Medical Council of Canada, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates of the United States, and the United States system as well. So essentially anyone who has a US MLE certificate, the Medical Council of New Zealand, and that's only really for graduates who go through what's called the NZ regs, because actual medical graduates of medical schools in New Zealand are really the apple or the kiwi fruit part of the apple. Actual medical graduates of New Zealand are actually considered absolutely equivalent to Australian graduates of Australian medical schools because they're actually accredited by the same authority, which we'll come to shortly. And then the last one is the Medical Council of Ireland. So IMGs who have primary qualifications in medicine awarded by a training institute, which is recognised in those jurisdictions and also recognised by what we call our Australian Medical Council, and is listed on what's called the World Directory of Medical Schools, and who have completed training or assessment within that authority. Usually they've had to get to the process of what we call general registration, so gone through the provisional process. So for example, in the UK, that would be the foundation years. They may basically apply for what's called provisional registration here via this competent authority pathway. So I'll put some links to some of these institutions, including the World Directory of Medical School and the Australian Medical Council and these councils, etc., in the description below. But as I said, this is probably the easiest pathway to getting registered and be able to start working and getting assessed to the point of general registration, or in some cases specialist registration. So the next pathway is the most common pathway that any non-specialist IMG will go through in order to gain registration, and it's called the standard pathway. So this pathway applies to IMGs who are not eligible for competent authority or the other pathway, which is the specialist pathway. So again, to come in through this category, you need to have a recognised primary qualification in medicine, but then instead of applying directly to the Medical Board of Australia, you have to apply to a different institution first, and that institution is the Australian Medical Council, or the AMC. So the AMC, and again I'll put a link to the AMC website in the description below, will assess you first, and if you meet the criteria, they will require you to sit a knowledge test. And you'll have to pass this AMC multiple choice question exam before you can then apply to the board for provisional registration. And at this point you'll also be given that registration, and it'll be contingent on you doing some other things to complete the process of assessment for general registration. So that'll either be sitting the second part of the AMC examination process, which is a set of clinical examinations, or going through a workplace-based assessment program that is accredited by the Australian Medical Council. So finally, there is what we call the specialist pathway. So the specialist pathway is for IMGs who are overseas trained specialists applying for assessment, or what's called comparability to the standard of a specialist in Australia. And it includes IMGs applying for what is called those area of need positions, which I talked about in a previous video. Again, like with all of these pathways, you'll need to have one of those recognised primary degrees first. But then, just to continue the confusion, IMGs applying for the specialist pathway don't apply to the medical board, and they don't apply to the AMC first. They actually apply to one of the colleges, the relevant college for their specialty, who then does the first process of assessment. So if, for example, you're a specialist from a competent authority country, it can be very confusing because you can apply to the Medical Board of Australia for provisional registration under the competent authority pathway to work in a supervised position, but at the same time you need to also apply to the college to assess your specialty training and experience and qualifications in order to get registered as a specialist and come through the specialist pathway. So there is actually a fifth option, which is not a pathway to permanent registration, so I mentioned it last. So this is what's called the short-term training in a medical specialty pathway, and it's for IMGs who are from overseas, who are either specialists or training in a specialty, who essentially want to come to Australia for some experience and then return to their own country and complete their training if they're completing training, or go back to practicing in their specialty. So it's specifically not a pathway to permanent registration, and as I said, it's time limited and it's usually for a period of up to 24 months. So it's not one of those pathways that's suitable if you're thinking about becoming a doctor permanently here. So there you have it. Those are the pathways to registration. As I said, it can be quite confusing at times. There are lots of different institutions involved, and we haven't even really got to the registration categories yet, and I promise to do that in a future video. Question time. How did I go at explaining the registration pathways? Leave a comment below if anything was unclear, or if you have a specific question that you would like to ask. I would love to hear some feedback from you. Okay, at the start of the video, I promised a bit of a bonus. So if you've watched all the way through, thank you very much. And here is a special reward. What I would like to offer to you is a chance to win a free enrolment in a course that I've put together to help doctors with their job application process. Specifically, it's a course on how to put together a CV that is appropriate to the sort of CV or resume that employers in Australia here are looking for. Already close to 100 medical students, interns, residents, registrars, and even international medical graduates have completed this course, and it's really helped them to turn their CV into something that stands out and draws the attention of the eye of the person reviewing job applications, and help them get through that crucial cull to getting an interview for a job in Australia. So all you have to do to enter the prize giveaway for one of those 5 free enrolments is to go to the link that I'll pop in the description below. Go to the landing page, register your email address, and you'll go into the prize draw. There are a couple of other options where you can win bonus entries to the giveaway. So check out the landing page, and explains all the things that you have to do. Okay, good luck with all that. So, as always, if this video was helpful to you, please leave a like or a comment below. If you're finding the channel particularly helpful, subscribe and turn on notifications. And I'll see you in another video.